I went for the. There we go.
The record now.
And Dávila is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, news producer, and activist. He is the director of the feature-length documentary, which we'll get to know a little bit today, Simulacros de Liberación, or Liberation Drills, in movie theaters in Puerto Rico in 2021. Previously, he directed 2 mid-length documentary films, Versus Compañeros de Lucha in 2012, and Vieques, Una Batalla en Conquista in 2016. His filmography also includes the award-winning short film La Generación del Standby in 2016, Aftershocks of Disaster in 2020, Network Education in 2020, US Sword in 21, and a TV pilot for the documentary series The Response in 2019. And in 2023, he won 2 New York Emmys for the TV series Puerto Rican Voices, where he worked as a director and executive producer. Those are online, please check them out. Dávila is a former senior producer at When We Fight We Win, the podcast, and news producer for the newscast Democracy Now!, where he continues to contribute as Puerto Rico's correspondent and producer. His journalistic work has been featured in Telesur, Washington Post, PBS, and Independent in New York. Communication from Universidad de Sagrado Corazón, Puerto Rico, and 2 masters in social documentation and Latin American and Latinx studies from the University of California, Santa Cruz. Dávila is currently directing a documentary about the life of community leader Carlos Tasso, and just finished a short about the decline of fish populations in Vieques, which is an island municipality off the coast of Puerto Rico main island. For PBS, Carlos Dávila.
Thank you for the invitation. I haven't been in this part of the world yet, so yeah, it's the body is a new geography, still adapting. So again, thanks for receiving me here, for the invitation. Thanks Aurora, thanks Sarah. I'm really looking forward to this conversation and that also the screening on Thursday night. So I'm going to start with talking about this flag, and since we are a small group here, perhaps can you tell me about what this flag is? Anybody has an idea? The Puerto Rican flag, right? But why isn't? But the Puerto Rican flag is not black and white, right? Have anybody seen the colors? What colors is it? Yeah, same thing as the US flag. Although and there's also a lot of controversy surrounding the blue because originally it's a more celestial blue and making it and through the governments wanting to adopt more of US hegemony, they have changed the blue to match more of the marine blue of the US flag. But I want to, but has anybody heard or have any idea, slight idea, why specifically this one is black and white? Resistance, yeah. Anybody else? Resistance to what, or? Colonialism. Okay. And then since when do you think that this flag has been around? Okay, so we're going to get into that because that's basically perhaps the starting point for the documentary that you're going to be seeing and the starting of the movement against austerity that happened in Puerto Rico from the 2016, which in the documentary I chronicled that it ends somewhere around 2020. After the Ricardo Renuncia protests. So this is the first time we have seen this flag. It was in this door. This is a door in Old San Juan, and a collective, a street art collective called La Puerta painted this mural. But originally the mural was with the original colors of the flag of Puerto Rico. But in July 4, 2016, they painted this door black. And the artist is an anonymous collective that have been always intervening this wall. But ever since that date, what is July 4? Obviously, the independence of the United States. So so it was important to paint it in that day to bring a counter narrative in Puerto Rico, and they paint this wall, and it brought some outrage also through some people in Puerto Rico, perhaps some of the most nationalistic people that understood that this was perhaps you know, it was a bad practice for the flag, that it was disrespectful for the flag. But I want to read you a part of the statement that the collective put when they painted this flag, and they put the statement. You see there, it's not complete in the picture, but here it is the statement that they put there, and I have translated in English, which says, "Dear sisters, the flag is wearing black. Puerto Rico is fighting. It is time to know. Since its beginning, the Puerto Rican flag has been a symbol of struggle in the face of the colonial status. And for many years, it was a felony to display it. Further on, under the 1952 colonial law, ELA, which is the free sovereign state that the term that the US says utilizes in front of the United States nations to hide that Puerto Rico is a colony. Under 1952 colonial law, ELA, the flag was officially adopted. Superseding those colors with black, the absence of light, gives birth to new interpretations. Our proposal is about resistance. This act is visible proof that there's an artistic community that will not stand idly, that is willing to fight against the abuse and the imposition of an absolutist government and its austerity measures, most recently called Promesa. Time to know, join the fight. Our best regards and experiencing and our best regards and expecting answers, artists in solidarity and resistance, La Puerta, which translates to the door. So this is a part of the statement that they put there. And they were reacting because maybe, I don't know how many of you know about the current board that is over Puerto Rico. So I'm going to have everybody heard some about it, how they are, is somehow an oversight board similar to what they have put in cities in the United States, although here they have put more like an emergency manager. Here is in Puerto Rico is a full board. I'm going to go quickly, give some context about that, and maybe we can talk more in the Q&A if you have more questions about that. But in 2016, the United States Congress passed legislation to approve the Puerto Rico Oversight, Management, and Economic Stability Act. That's what Promesa means, to address fabricated debt. And why do I call it a fabricated debt? And many of my colleagues also have different names to it, an odious debt, an illegitimate debt, an illegal debt. It's because the Puerto Rican people did not consent to the debt, to getting in debt. It was not explained to us Puerto Ricans why this debt was are we incurring into this debt before the country started taking these large loans, which these loans are mainly municipal bonds through Wall Street bondholders, because Puerto Rico as a colony does not have access to World Bank or IMF, so it's directly connected to Wall Street. It was noticeable that the Puerto Rican government was borrowing more money than it could handle, and the US, as the major authority figure in Puerto Rico, could foresee it. So if you run the numbers, you could see that definitely Puerto Rico would default in the payment of the loans, and that the money that was being borrowed was more than Puerto Ricans can handle. Another reason is because we are a US colony that don't have autonomy over the country. So all transactions are being made in the benefit of the colonial power. And the debt, and this is why so many people call it the odious debt, the debt did not benefit the Puerto Rican people directly. It's not like Puerto Rico gain a huge development, like we have a great infrastructure afterwards. Perhaps there's some debt that was incurred to build a metro, a rail system, a train, but this is not an effective train. So that is also like a huge part of the debt. It only have about 12 stops and it doesn't like really connect the city. You have a big coliseum that was built with that debt, which is mostly a coliseum to bring major mainstream artists, and it's being also like privatized. So it's another company that handles the coliseum administration. It's not like the government is making money for renting the coliseum for, let's say, Bad Bunny. It's all handled through a private company. So really, there was no benefit from the Puerto Rican people incurring into this debt. And the debt built up throughout especially in the 90s and the 2000s, the debt really rise up in the early 2000s. And with that, the debt somewhat $73 billion. And if you count other obligations, it goes all the way into $120 billion. But still, even these numbers I say keep changing, and there's a lot of controversy behind the audit of the debt and how much Puerto Ricans really owe. This has been an issue also of controversy. And but this debt, which they started calling the debt crisis, helped the government start to begin putting forward neoliberal policies, because it's okay, the country is in debt. I mean, you're all here in Latin American and Caribbean studies, the trick that they do in Latin American countries. So it was the perfect excuse to start, imposing neoliberal policies. And this job was undertaken by the Fiscal Control Board, which established Promesa, which was a bit what I was saying at the beginning, that rather than having just an emergency manager, as it has happened in cities here in the United States. Detroit, for example, that is close to here, had a similar thing when bankrupt. But in the case of Puerto Rico, we're having a 7-member board of people who don't live in Puerto Rico, who don't know about Puerto Rico, but are making decisions about Puerto Rico and are having more authority in the legal sense and decision power than any Puerto Rican elected official. So the board comes on top of all the elected politicians, which, makes us question, really why do we eventually vote, or why do we spend that much energy thinking that voting is going to solve an issue right now as we're having and a Fiscal Control Board. So the Puerta responds to this. This was approved on under the Obama administration, and then it was in August 31st, 2016, or first appointed their members, which it was a compromise by the Democratic Party, because the Republicans understood that this was a bailout, not a debt restructure. And the way that the Democrats negotiated was that 4 of the appointees were going to be nominated by the Republican Party and 3 from the Democratic Party. So it's essentially also a Republican control board, and it is like that by legislation. So unless we change the law, it's basically 4 Republicans that are controlling the fate of Puerto Rico. So going back to La Puerta, it was all this was happening when they decided to paint this flag. And as they say in their statement, you know, they want to give new interpretations to the flag. And I find this very interesting because I always see that the role of the artist is to inspire new sensations and new emotions and new imaginaries. And in this case, and this is something that has been part of the writings I've done about this mural and about this intervention, is that the Puerta uses what Victor Shavlovsky calls the familiarization, which is how are you used to be seeing an object in one way, and when the artist familiarize it, then it can give new interpretation. Some examples of artists doing that are the Duchamp's art, Andy Warhol, how you take the kind of soup, how do you take it and change the perspective that you're seeing it, and how it provokes new conversations. So La Puerta is able to achieve this at an island-wide level in Puerto Rico, provoke new conversations when they painted this black and white flag. And the movement, Promises Are Over, Jornada Acabaron las Promesas, which is the movement that the documentary that you're going to be seeing on Thursday essentially follows, adapts this flag as their main symbol. And I'm going to be showing a clip of the film where you see one of the activists discussing this.
O roja, ¿no? Antes de llevártelo, vaya así, para que no bote. Yo con calma.
Claro. Hoy fue material. Todavía me falta.
Hay una deuda en el país y no fue en pro ni a conciencia del pueblo de la gente, ni en pro de la calidad de vida de la gente. Así que esa deuda la tienen que pagar los responsables y no somos la gente de aquí. Estamos en preparativos para manifestaciones próximas. Se acerca el 31 de agosto. Es una manifestación conmemorándonos, dejando saber que después de un año seguimos aquí gente resistiendo.
Yo creo que cada uno debería hacer el suyo.
Let me just finish it here. Oh, yeah.
Hay una deuda en el país y no fue en pro ni a conciencia del pueblo de la gente, ni en pro de la calidad de vida de la gente. Así que esa para manifestaciones próximas, se acerca el 31 de agosto. Es una manifestación conmemorándonos, dejando saber que después de un año seguimos aquí gente resistiendo.
Yo creo que cada uno debería hacer el suyo.
Because so as you see, they are building these wooden shields that the movement was using to defend themselves when they were making the protests in the street, especially because when this protest started happening, you know, a lot of police special forces went out and with batons beat many activists. So, you know, it has been a practice to find to build this wooden shield so activists can defend themselves. So it's something that it has always, I've seen, I don't know, I mean, it's not the first time that it has been done. I've seen archival pictures of this being done in student protests, and also in protests in the 80s. So I really cannot point out when was the first time that we started using like that. And there are many pictures also with shields being done with part of the big plastic garbage trash cans, you know. And this also I know is a practice that I started exclusive in Puerto Rico, but perhaps the Promesas Are Over movement started also adopting the wooden shield as their own symbol too, because they had the flag painted in front of it, and it just also, you know, made a statement in the streets, you know, about how that black and white flag multiplicated, which for me is an interpretation also about how that idea that La Puerta is proposing gets multiplicated across the Puerto Rican audience. So art can inspire a movement, which is essentially why I'm so interested in the intervention that La Puerta made. But the movement can also inspire art, which is what happened to me, in the sense that and now I'm going to talk more about the process of the film. Because as this was happening, I also got inspired into documenting the struggle, understanding that this was had a historical importance in Puerto Rican, for us in Puerto Rico, and not just because of this new law that the US government and the US Congress was imposing, but perhaps also because of our reaction to it. And I began filming cinema verite scenes of these. For those who, I don't know if anybody here from cinema, but basically the concept of verite scenes is making real cinema, capturing the real and observing the process without interfering, what they call it a fly on the wall. This eventually was questioned by many filmmakers, and eventually the concept, although the idea of cinema verite is still continuous, but everybody understands that it's not as pure, that it's more a participant cinema, because the filmmaker and the camera, just by being there, are still intervening in the process. Perhaps is that we don't direct as fiction filmmakers or other forms of documentary. And this film that I did about all of this that was happening in Puerto Rico, which is based on the imposition of the Fiscal Control Board and austerity measures, and the reaction from the people, from social movements, organizations, and activists, took me 3 years of filming and 2 years of editing. And this is like a thesis or dissertation. You gotta be committed to your topic to finish it, right? And one thing that I mentioned one of my last presentations that I'm now including is that, believe it or not, I was living in the US most of those 3 years, which doesn't seem like, because some people say like I capture like every major event. Because and that's where I think that, you know, for us who study Latin American and Caribbean studies, you know, the role of the diaspora is very important. Now that I live full-time back in Puerto Rico since 2019, I haven't had the time to really like look at my country and analyze it, like as when I was living in the United States. Like I was able to be like a satellite and watch what was happening in Puerto Rico, and really found every trend down. And now that I am there, is for some reason I find it very difficult to do. So it's also very so this film is also a birth of it's a diasporic film, because and I want to say that to always emphasize the role of the diaspora, because as people are dealing there day by day, sometimes it's important to look at from far away to understand what is happening. And this is something that I read, that Gabriel, I think it was Gabriel Garcia Marquez who talked about that. He always liked to write about Colombia, but in Mexico, because being in City of Mexico in the F, it was more easy for him to understand, to see Colombia. So I figured that is somewhat of the same relationship with with any other a project where you're doing some creative or investigative work. And in many of these instances, I was what they called a one-man band. I have a lot of training as a journalist covering different topics, where I have learned that sometimes I am the only person that is trusted to get in certain spaces. I cannot go with another journalist or with a crew, so I just need to have like everything on me. So just with a bag as the one you see now, my I have the essentials to cover a story, the microphones and the lights if needed, the batteries, the chargers. Also always carry a fanny pack, and the camera usually I bring it with me in a monopod. So I've been finding ways to make my form of filming more lightweight, so I can move around. Trying to use advantage of the new technologies like GoPros, like even the cell phones right now, like shoot very good. And I know, and I say this, I know this is not like a cinema a group, but I say this especially because I think that a part of we're losing a lot of opportunity in cinema because we always want to use like the big lens and the big lights, and everybody wants to show off. But now the new technologies like give us a lot of opportunity to document and get more intimate to topics, and I think we should use it to advantage. And for people who are not filmmakers, I think this is always also very important, because I think that right now saying that same thing, it democratizes cinema, so many people can film, when something is important. And you cannot believe how many good footage like helps me with somebody like filming good in the cell phone. Just the important thing, if you're filming something important, don't film it vertically, please film it horizontally, so that we can use it in film later on. Because the sound and stuff you can play around, and these like iPhones, that they shoot very good resolution. So sometimes if you shoot it with the proper lighting and stuff, you might have something that looks like good as a professional camera. You just need to know how to use it. So it's important. I think we're losing that because, and this is also a call I've been doing recently, because we're focusing a lot on making the stories very quickly when it happens in protests. And sometimes I work as a journalist and I tell people, oh, hey, can you send me stuff of the protest? I see you were like live broadcasting. No, everything is a live broadcast. Now I need to use the live broadcast, which was vertical, and make something. So yeah, always, even with the cell phones, you can do very, very good stuff, because, there's not always going to be a filmmaker necessarily. Then I did some interviews, because at first I wanted to make this film completely observational, but when I made the first cuts, like people did not understand it, and it was going to be, it's already a 2-hour long film, so it's going to be way longer to give context. So started implementing interviews and narrations, which became a decision in the post-production process, where I also inserted myself as a character in the film. Like this is me, the camera person who has been documenting this for 3 years. Because many of, as you would see in the film, many of the footage, I am like inside the protest, so you are going to feel like you are there being one more activist. And I got beat up and took pepper spray gas and all that to deliver this documentary. I also like to mention that I took on such a large project. I was able to deliver it because I became my own producer. Although now I work with other producers, I have had this film has also opened a lot of doors for me. So though I'm not as one-man band as always, although I did use some associate producers in this film, but now the team is bigger. My partner Camila Rodriguez worked with me. She's also a producer of the upcoming films. But I think it's still important that creators are their own producers. Also, as producers, being an administrator, I think you know, in administrator in the sense not just money, but also how to use resources. Because to make independent art, you know, you have to also be a good administrator to sustain yourself, and because I figured that, and perhaps I'm talking here more about if we were having more of I mean, this is hybrid between a cinema audience and Latin American studies and Caribbean studies audience, but it is a luxury to make art sometimes, right? And many people and us people of color, especially from Puerto Rico, it's very difficult to have that luxury. So that is why it's very important to know how to manage your resources. I think that, you know, at some point I wanted to be the crazy artist, you know, that is always, you know, thinking and don't care about money and it's very like you know, uncaring about all these things. But then I learned that if I went that, then I am like the crazy artist and the inspired, and you know, I cannot do that. So I really like, you know, need to do the art, but also with the food on the ground. And essentially I want my films to inspire change, but most of the times, although it inspires conversation, it inspires conscience, the monster is too big, how we call it. And one of the examples are the school closings in Puerto Rico due to the austerity policies implemented by the Fiscal Control Board. And closing the schools is not only the problem, also the problem is underfunding the schools, because even those that remain open do not have the sufficient resources, which I think is something that is not talked as much, because we talk about the closings, but even those that remain open, not even those resources or that money that could have been saved is not put into those that remain open. So right now I'm also in Vieques teaching a podcast course, which is completely financed by our collective, because the Department of Education, it doesn't, you know, we don't even start that process because it's not going to get approved. So we do it with our own resources and pro bono. But you can see so sad, because even if we are doing stuff pro bono, you know, just the conditions of the school, you know, we don't have, it's very difficult to find, for example, to make a podcast, a good classroom with where students can record that has like air conditioning. There's only one a classroom with air conditioning in the whole school, and it's for those with special needs. So when we go there, they need to take the special needs to somewhere else. So, you know, so everything is so difficult, and then they have computers, but the computers have not been maintained. So, and there's like leaks, you know, there. So it's and all this people, you know, it is part of the ongoing underfunding and austerity policies that that the government has been doing, and have been even more palpable, more aggressive after the Fiscal Control Board came in. So the next clip that is also part of the documentary, what you are going to be seeing is one teacher from the town of Dorado. In the last day in the school, after they had a camp for many days so that the school would not close, and she's saying goodbye to her kindergarten classroom. De vuelta a la zona metropolitana, regresé a Dorado, al barrio Mameyal, donde justo antes del inicio de clases, el Departamento de Educación ordenó el desalojo de la escuela Luis Muñoz Rivera y reubicó sus estudiantes en la escuela Jacinto López Martínez.
Estoy canalizando fondos federales para aumentar su salario de otra manera, voluntariamente si ellos quieren. Lo que estoy haciendo con de no despedir a nadie. Lo que no entiendo es que ¿por qué tenemos que pelear? Estoy haciendo todo lo que está a mi alcance para velar por sus intereses y lo hago porque es correcto.
Juana Maimí será una de las maestras desplazadas este otoño de 2018.
Este del salón de kinder tiene hasta sus baños y el salón de kinder de la otra escuela no tiene baños.
So in that, so as you're going to be seeing the film, this teacher, you know, goes heartbreaking, and you'll see the complete scene in the film where all the teachers are just like getting all their belongings and moving, and the Department of Education is not even helping them with that, so they're bringing their own like cars and everything to do that by themselves because they don't even assist on that. And this also creates another problem, the problem of many students being together in a classroom, which is also what many teachers are complaining about. And imagine like more children in the classrooms, no air conditioning, the heat in Puerto Rico, climate change. So it's really really like when people like the Fiscal Control Board are just like looking at numbers in their Excel sheets or whatever program accounting program they use, they're not looking at what perhaps like saving a couple of $1,000s a year might mean for a community. And that's what I tried to do in the documentary. I tried to really like show the human impacts of these cuts. So what is happening in Puerto Rico right now? My opinion is that us as Puerto Ricans, and this is a very biased opinion, have forgot about the control board. I think we still like asking our government to respond as if they really had authority. The neoliberal policies are being kept pushing Puerto Rico. And it is important to acknowledge that the Puerto Rican officials are corrupt and very corrupt. But this corruption is part of the colonial structure that the board is part of. So you cannot look at those apart. And I think the U.S. hegemony in Puerto Rico and the corporate hegemony, more than the U.S. hegemony, I would say now, the U.S. corporate hegemony have been very successful in really like thinking, okay, the fault is from the people who govern you. Yeah, but these people who govern us are corrupt and are corrupt or are part of your structure. And that's why I'm glad to keep showing this film so we can continue having this conversation. To finalize now, I want to show the trailer of the film. So then, yeah, so you get inspired to go and go to the Cinematheque on Thursday.
Aquí han pasado hace 10, 12 años un montón de medidas donde nos han eliminado la capacidad de vivir bien en este país. Y nada, el gobierno no es una alternativa.
Puerto Rico is $73 billion in debt. And so we are going to put in to effect an oversight board.
Right-sizing the government is necessary because it's not affordable.
Entendemos que tenemos la autoridad y si no es así, es mejor saberlo desde ya.
El gobierno de Puerto Rico, en lugar de estimular una auditoría, lo que ha hecho es encubrir a estos individuos y premiarlos. Hurricane Maria, which just made landfall in Puerto Rico this morning as a Category 4 storm, just down from Category 5 hurricane. We are dying here.
Vamos a maximizar los recursos porque a veces se nos queda gente sin comer. Es una porción pequeña. Queremos dar más, pero no podemos.
Pensamos que la mejor manera de girar la dinámica en otra dirección es contribuyendo a que la población esté mejor. Tiene que ser la población afectada por el colonialismo la que en última instancia resista el colonialismo.
I hate to tell you, Puerto Rico, but you've thrown our budget a little out of whack.
Hemos aprovechado el capitalismo del desastre de un huracán que ha puesto el pueblo vulnerable.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
So we have plenty of time for questions, so I'm gonna open it up to thoughts and questions that you all have for our speakers for today.
Yeah, I'm sorry. One thing that we didn't that I didn't cover in the presentation because it was going to be like a lot more is the Hurricane Maria, which we are going to be seeing in the documentary, and how like these budget cuts really make the country even more vulnerable when a hurricane comes.
I have a question about the process. So when you mentioned you made the first cuts and then you realized you had to go back and do interviews. Just thinking logistically, like what that process was like in terms of developing.
I mean, I had some
like, oh my God.
Yeah, I think I had some interviews already done
Okay.
because of getting people in the streets on a day by day. But then like I really should have said if we go and finish the interviews because the idea was never to like use them at all, but I also like played on the safe side. But I think it was good because it helped me have the interviews be more directed.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, and I was always also like logging the film as I was doing it, and I already like doing some part of the early editing process. Even though I say it was 2 years, but before, and that also like always helped me that I was looking at the material fresh. So yeah, I think
Like
it
the
was.
narrative was developing as you were.
Yeah, I did the scene. The documentary is driven more by the scenes than by the interview. The interviews come to give context and also help us understand the characters. But I built like all the scenes, I mean, that we have in the documentary by itself, like a movie. And then, in that place, it's like, okay, like this scene needs context, and that's when the interview would come in. Yeah.
Do the protests happen around specific events or dates or government decisions, or what is, I mean, we see people preparing for protests, so what's the occasion that prompts the protest, and is that consistent, or is it just, or are there multiple reasons for people to protest?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So it was, it was always like a specific date, at least for the documentary. I think one of the key dates, it was August 31st, 2016, which was the day that the Chamber of Commerce made make what they called the first Promesa conference, which basically what they did was it was a conference so that business people would know how they can take advantage from and investors from Promesa. So the idea from Promesas Are Over was to shut down this conference, which they did. It was not successful for the Chamber of commerce, many people were not able to get in, most of their attendees. And I've heard that they needed to get the money back and that kind of stuff. And then eventually, like, the 31st, but that date, it was the same day that Obama appointed the 7 members of the board. So it became, also the first day that the board, was, named. So, so every 31st, there's always something, and even up to last year, August 31st is always a date. Also, the date of May 1st has been consistent since the board happened. Usually, this is something that Jorel can talk more about, perhaps. Usually, perhaps a couple of years before, the May 1st was not as active, but since 2016, it became more active. I remember they made like a protest in Walmart that May 1st. Talking about, a Walmart that is there in the middle of the city in Santurce. But then the big ones were, the big protests were in 2017 and 2018. So the year of Maria and the year after, those were like the really big ones of May 1st. And then always the March 8th, the Women's International Day, there's always protests those days. So it's a combination between international days of mobilization and the specific days of Puerto Rico. And I would say that also dates where the board was meeting. So, and this was specifically done by the students movement. I don't know why we lost that, and that doesn't continue happening because they continue meeting. But the students that went on strike, as you were going to see in the film, were very active in mobilizing people into the meetings of the board. So I would say those are like the meeting dates.
And Ricardo Rosselló resigned. Every day there were protests in July.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, with Ricardo Rosselló protests. Yeah, that was, people were committed to that. And yeah, that was basically after the chat was leaked. I think immediately there was a protest the very same day, and then continue building up and building up. And there, I think it was perfect. And then we'll go around.
I'm wondering, just from your interviews with people, or even just your own opinion, what the connection, if there's a connection made between this issue of the board and Promesa and the status debate in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, I think well, I think, like I said, like we stopped talking about the board. I think I mean, maybe some people would disagree, but I right now there's a coalition of I mean, the activists and the radical groups always like speak on it, but thinking about the general discourse, the public discourse, this has like disappeared. Like you don't see journalists. I mean, they even back then they didn't talk much about this. I think most of them did not understand it and still don't understand it, unfortunately. But they're very good also, like a Center for Investigative Journalism and some media outlets that have done a very good job that I have informed my work on those. But as far as the general public discourse, I don't see as present. But I think that now also there's a coalition of like soft left-leaning two parties, the Independence Party and another party that's called MOVC, Victory Movement, it was translated.
Citizens Victory Movement.
Citizens Victory Movement, which is more progressive, but they're not well defined also on the status, although most of them go more toward independence. But I think, but even in their discourse, and it's surprising, the Independence Party have said that if they win, they're not going to, or at least the mayor candidate, they're not going to bring independence to Puerto Rico, that they're just going to administer Puerto Rico better, which falls again to this narrative that I am saying. I think, and I have a lot of, and this goes into a deeper conversation, specifically with the postures that the Independence Party has taken, which for some people is the main voice of independence in Puerto Rico, but it's really not, because many of the independence organizations do not necessarily think that the electoral route is the proper route for decolonization. So you cannot really measure the independence support by really measuring the electoral results. And now even that the main independence party is moving away from saying, hey, we're not going to bring independence, we're going to just administer the country better. We're going to get crooked, out those crooked officials, out those corrupt government officials, but then reinforces this narrative. So I don't know if I think in Puerto Rico we need to go back to this. It opened it at some point, but I think now we're entering into these new territories with this new coalition that we need to analyze. And journalists a lot, like here in the US, they all the political discussion is, and this also a critique for me for journalism, is always like is presented to the perspectives of the parties, and there's there's always like a lot of other political perspectives outside the party. So it's always like the official voice of statehood is the statehood party, the official voice of independence, the independence party, and it just gets stuck there. So so I think that's it started at some point at the beginning when you see, as you will see in the documentary, those first 2 or 3 years, but then I think later it has not been as present.
You mentioned diaspora.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you can talk about what this conversation about austerity measures, the board in Puerto Rico looks like amongst members of the Puerto Rican diaspora here in the United States. We can how has that changed after Maria? Yeah. Broadly, I know you're.
But I think more people have moved from Puerto Rico, more migration have come into the United States after all these cuts, because there's less jobs, less funding, less opportunities. So there's definitely the impact of people moving here, but I'm not sure how to interpret the effects of Puerto Ricans living here. How does that?
I guess in my own experience, a lot of what I've heard focuses more on Puerto Rico's status as a U.S. Sultan. This is totally new to me, right? This conversation, what is actually happening here, and I'm wondering if if there's any sort of movement here in the United States amongst Puerto Ricans who are here who are bringing attention to this.
Yeah, I think always there's Puerto Ricans in New York and Puerto Ricans in Chicago, have been very, active discussing this. And I think one of the, the board meets in New York, and they always protest. There's always Puerto Ricans protesting in New York. I think sometimes even more than in Puerto Rico, because since they're less important in New York, what they do is that they register to the meeting and then they start screaming inside the meeting and then they take them out. So it's always we're very grateful for everybody who goes and do that. So yeah, but yeah, in that sense, I think, this that we're doing right now is the way, what Aurora is doing, I think through the academic, I think there's a very good academic Puerto Rican movement here that is always bringing activists into the United States and into the university and to the institutions to talk about. So I think that's very important, because not myself, I know a lot of other folks that do very important work come here and talk about it, and perhaps would not be possible if Puerto Ricans in diaspora are taking care of that. So but in regards to a movement, we don't have a movement in Puerto Rico right now, so I think we needed there to be strong, so that happened in Enrique Renuncia when it was very strong, the movement happened here also. I think they were protesting almost every state, against, asking for Ricardo resignation, and even bigger was in Vieques, when in Vieques they were asking the Navy to withdraw and leave from the island. There was a lot of protests here, and I think even more, they were even bigger. Yeah. And you have the famous when Tito Kayak, although he was from Puerto Rico, but with help with the but but it was still here when you went into the Statue of Liberty and put the flag. So there's always have been like some way of a ripple effect here in the diaspora. But I guess for me, I think it all depends on how active people are also in the island.
I feel like my question is covered.
Okay.
There's so many more.
Okay. Yeah. We can talk that there after the screen.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine like after Hurricane Maria, there was more mobilization. Just because it might have dire circumstances, or do you think there were more protests? And if so, do you think that it's kind of died down? Efforts to be more politically active
Yeah, I think that after Hurricane Maria, a lot of the protests died down for a few months, and many of the activists, as you will see in the documentary, went on working in community kitchens and doing a lot of underground work, just helping out with the basic necessities that people were feeling. So it was very interesting because it was like it showed that those who were protesting in the streets were also ready to get their hands dirty, and that's exactly what happened, and that we put in practice many of the things that we say. And I think it's very similar. I always compare it to what happened in New York after Hurricane Sandy. That was the Occupy Wall Street movement, that many of the people that were in occupying Wall Street and went into the Rockaways to help the people out, and also establish community kitchen, community centers. So something like that happened. And I think that was very important also to maintain the momentum, because then almost a year after, it made the summer after, it was another big protest in May 1st, which is some of the images that you see here in the documentary. In May 1st, 2018, the summer after the hurricane, there was a lot of big protests. And I think that revived the spirit of people fighting, and it continued all the way into Ricardo Renuncia. And then, and it continued all the way up to, because then Ricardo Rosselló eventually stepped down. And I remember that there were still protests for the next governor that was in the chain of command, because some stuff, I remember some stuff was discovered in regards of some bottled water that was needed to be distributed after Maria and was never distributed. There were some people that also protested about that, and the privatization of the electrical grid also inspired some protests, which is, I mean, the electrical grid also not functioning properly is another example of austerity measures, and how our debt was not really used in our benefit, because so much debt of the electrical authority, and it was never able to modernize itself. So that's how I say it's all fabricated. And but now it has died down, and I think we need to really and going back to what I was saying to, what's your name? Angelo, we need to look at what is happening with this coalition of electoral, because I think that all efforts are important, but an effort cannot cancel another effort. And I see that ever since it started to put that we can change the government, and that we can have the people from this South left-leaning party into office, or we imagine that we can, there's a lot of effort being put there, and people are not as much in the streets. And we got to remember that, and just to give you some context, the thing is that after Ricky Renuncia, there were two progressive parties. I mean, the Independence Party and the Citizens Victory Movement, that Aurora, that's the right translation, right? The Citizens Victory Movement, that they both in the elections got 15%. And in Puerto Rico, you don't need the majority, or you don't need 50 plus 1 to win the election. So they think now that if they combine they're both 50%, 15%, they can reach into 30%, and that they can add some stuff there, and that they can win the election with 30 something. But the reason why they, and this is my analysis, the reason why they made 15% each is because people were those 4 years before were in the streets, and that mobilization in the streets really moves the vote to a more progressive vote. And now we don't have it. Maybe I'm wrong. I think it's very interesting to see what is going to be happening in the next election, if actually this combination is going to work, if they all together get the 30% and more, because the one who might be running is the incumbent, and the incumbent by statistics always go down. But it might be interesting to look at what is happening there. And also you have also a lot of corruption in the electoral system, like here in the United States, because the main two parties have been putting people there for years and know the electoral system. So, you know, there's always like also like new grounds for the people who are like, ¿cómo se dice apostando? Like betting on that strategy. So I think we need to look at it. Is, you know, we still like learning from what we do, but I think it is a factor, and we cannot take it, you know, I mean, we need to take into consideration what are the effects of that coalition.
And there's two things happening. First, there's been historically very low voter turnout in Puerto Rico. So the pro-statehood governor won with something like 32%. That's why 30-something% is important, because it can actually beat what, you know, the very low voter turnout. Two, the two mainstay political parties have impugnado, they have challenged the validity of the nomination process of these challenging parties. So not just the MVC, but also a far-right religious party called Project Dignity. And so right now, the court just ruled that about 5 candidates from the MVC are disqualified. So now they're challenging that decision. That's in the appeals process right now. So there's a lot of happening because the political establishment is so terrified of the possibility of the MVC and the Independence Party coming together and actually making a dent and actually like having people in office. So that it's a huge moment for these elections now because of these problems that have been happening.
Folks, we've reached the end of our time together. Thank you once again.